Okay.
Welcome to the Culver City Democratic Club State Senate Forum, hosted by Maximina Juson. And Max will moderate the forum and introduce our three candidates. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for
Yes, welcome and thank you all for joining the forum this evening. So tonight I'll be moderating a forum to interview three candidates for State Senate District 28. And again, I'm Maximina Juson. I'm a local journalist and a filmmaker. And so what we'll do right now is we're going to begin with an overview of tonight's format. First, each candidate will have 3 minutes to introduce themselves. Then after they introduce themselves, we'll proceed with questions. We'll have 6 rounds in which I will pose the same question to each candidate, and 2 rounds where I will ask each candidate a unique question. Each candidate has completed a questionnaire and their answers will appear on the club website in the next week. And some of tonight's questions are based on those responses. So each candidate, again, will have 2 minutes to respond. And once we run through the questions, we'll give each candidate 2 minutes for their closing remarks. Okay, so if we're all clear with the format, we're going to move ahead and we'll start with introductions in alphabetical order of the candidates' last names. Then we'll alternate who goes first for the subsequent questions. So we'll start with Mr. Jamaal Gulledge. I hope I pronounced that right.
Perfectly, thank you. Good evening, Democrats. Jamaal Gulledge, pronouns are he, him, his. I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. It's a pleasure to be in the room with you all virtually. So a little bit about me and why I'm in this race. I've always been in public service. I started working with seniors when I was 16, working in assisted living facilities, wearing various kinds of hats. I've had the opportunity to learn from seniors about their unique needs, whether it be healthcare, family needs, housing, and I've had the opportunity to work with students on the other side. I currently work at UCLA. I see a fellow Bruin and Lola here. I work at UCLA as an HR manager, and I have the opportunity to work with students, dedicating, my life to public service. But the real reason why I'm in this race is because of healthcare. I remember when my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I was pretty young at the time. And back in those days, there was no Obamacare. And I remember my mom would go to chemo in the morning and go to work afterwards. And, I couldn't understand why she wouldn't have to go to work after chemo. Most folks would go home, nap, you're drained from the chemotherapy. Well, I learned from my mom that most of it was because of, one, pride. She had pride in her work. She also was a public servant. She worked for the city of Portland. But the other part of it was she had to have healthcare. And she didn't work, she wouldn't have healthcare. And then lastly, the other part of it was she had to pay the mortgage. She was a single mom. She worked 2 jobs at a time in order to keep food and the lights on. So that's why I'm in this race, because I sincerely believe that healthcare should be a human right and not a privilege to those of us, or for all. I believe housing should be a right. Another part of my story is that my brother recently passed away from homelessness. He was at the young age of 44 and died on the streets of Portland alone. And that's why, again, like healthcare, I believe it should be a human right. So I'm in this race because we need change. We need a candidate who is from the area, who brings different perspectives. And we also need to make history. We know the Democrats are all about making history. I was the first male in my family to graduate from college. I'm the only male in my family to have a graduate degree. And if I would be elected to this position, I would be the first openly gay legislator in California history. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and I look forward to hearing from the other candidates as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Gulledge. We will now proceed with introductions from Ms. Lola Smallwood-Cuevas. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with the Culver City Dems. I've had an opportunity to meet with many and speak with many of your leaders and learning from them. And it's a real honor and a privilege to be here. I want to say, like Jamaal, yes, I work with UCLA. I'm a researcher and a labor educator there and work with students. But I began my career organizing in the labor movement with the Justice for Janitors Union, the Security Officers Union, and later building the first Black Worker Center in California, bringing underrepresented workers together to fight for their rights to have access to quality jobs and opportunity. I am the daughter of a single teenage mom. She was a home care worker who worked 2 jobs and put herself through school. She left everything behind in Newark, New Jersey, where she joined the Navy. And that was our migration story to California. She sacrificed so much. We sacrificed so much. And every day she had to make hard choices between parenthood and livelihood. And that really is at the heart and core of why I'm in this race, why I do what I do. Why I have been organizing at the intersections of race and capital to create opportunity, because too many of our families have to make these kinds of choices. And I'm running because, this is we live in a California where this economy is working for far too few. And the rest of our communities, particularly Black and immigrant communities, are drowning in economic and racial disparities. If we don't act boldly, these problems already are having a devastating effect in those communities, but those effects will certainly impact us all. And we're starting to see that in housing. We're starting to see that in mass incarceration. We're seeing that in health disparities. And I believe that it is possible for us to bring dynamic coalitions together, labor unions, business owners, property owners, nonprofit partners, unusual suspects to the table, to really strategize and prioritize solutions for our children. I have 2 Blaxican children who go to school in Culver City, and I want a better future for them. I am an intersectional leader with the trust of communities that I have served and organized in for decades, 2 decades. And, I have an equitable vision for California and how it will work. And I want to facilitate these difficult conversations. I want to bring these diverse constituencies together, like these amazing voices that are here in Culver City, leaders and thinkers, and transform the problems that we're facing, into opportunities for change for all of us.
Thank you so much, Ms. Smallwood-Cuevas. Now we will continue with State Commissioner Cheryl Turner. And is it okay if I refer to everybody by first name for the rest of the forum? Thank you so much.
Yes, yes, of course. So good evening, fellow Culver City Democrats, and to the general public as well. My name is Cheryl Turner, and I'm running to be your next state senator. And so I'll be asking for your endorsement and your vote at the ballot. I've had an opportunity to meet many of you before, but for those that haven't met me before, let me tell you a little bit about me. I was born and raised within the district, and I attended the public schools there, and I'm very proud of that fact. After going to law school and graduating from there, and ultimately becoming a small business owner by opening my own small law office, I've been advocating and fighting for civil and criminal justice within the court system by representing clients every day who are faced with possibly the loss of income or the loss of their freedom, or having been subjected to family members who have lost their lives. I have been leading on building and providing affordable housing within our community, especially to senior citizens, and I'm extremely proud of that fact. I've also been involved in economic development as a commissioner with the City of Los Angeles. I've been involved in developing and creating and ensuring quality health care for all Californians as a state commissioner with the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians. Once elected, I will continue to lead on issues that are important to our community, like preserving our environment, ensuring public safety within our neighborhoods, and improving the quality of all of our lives. We need my leadership and years of experience to address homelessness, climate change, job creation, and improving our economy, and many other critical issues within our community. So again, I'm going to be asking for your endorsement, and thank you for hosting this forum.
Wonderful. Thank you. Very nice to meet all of the impressive candidates. Now that we've completed our introductions, we'll now proceed with questions. Jeff Schwartz will be timing the answers, and he will give you a, I think, 30-second warning that your time is about to run out, so that you'll know to wind things down just in respect of everyone's time and keeping the forum at a reasonable length for this evening. What we're going to do is we're going to, again, alternate who goes first for each question. And so the first candidate that will be answering the first question will be Lola. All right, so the first question we have is about the housing crisis. The state is facing a housing crisis. What are the top 3 barriers to housing production? And what are the policies that you would support to address those barriers? Lola?
Well, to fully address the housing crisis, we have to address a number of issues. It's production, affordability, fairness, it's enforcement of rights and services. So, our wages are stagnant, but the cost of living is rising, exploding, and the rent is just too damn high. The 2020 state of California address, the governor really focused and highlighted the issue of housing, which is tremendous, and there have been bold investments. I was happy to see that SB 9 and SB 10 made it finally to the governor's desk, and that we have an opportunity to really increase housing production, right? And it's something that we have to do. We see with unemployment and the job crisis, we see with folks coming and returning home, we see with the number of immigrant families, we don't have enough housing to address the growth in our communities. And so in my view, I am really focused on this question of how do we deal with some of the bureaucracy that's standing in the way of production? How do we streamline those processes so that we can quickly move the production of housing forward? How do we deal with some of the administrative costs to building housing? Some of those admin about % of project budgets, which is outrageous given the need for housing, how much more housing we could have by addressing that overhead. And then, I think we really need to talk about the ways in which lawmakers and housing developers and advocates and unions need to come together and develop not just a housing program, but a jobs program that goes along with it. We can build affordable housing, we can increase production, and at the same time, we can increase quality jobs so that as we're building our housing stock, we're also creating careers and real opportunity for folks to support themselves and their families.
It's over time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lola. Now, Cheryl, it's your turn.
Yes, well, thank you for asking that question. Housing is one of my areas of expertise. As a leader of housing for the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles, I've had an opportunity to interact with members of every color, creed, and economic level. And most of them are having issues with red tape, mostly within, I would say, the city of Los Angeles, not necessarily Culver City and the county of Los Angeles, that they have to go through to obtain permitting and to pay for issues related to housing. Now, my groups are not necessarily developers, they're small mom and pops, but just to operate, there's an issue of regulation. And I know that we all need laws in place to protect us, to protect our rights, to ensure that there is fair housing. But some of the regulations have gotten so out of control, it is making some of our housing providers want to leave the business. And I know we're going to eventually talk about things like Ellis and all that, which is another topic. But, this is a free market, and, people have to be able to have a reasonable rate of return in order to remain within the business of providing housing. And in order to pay the bills, the mortgage, the utilities, everything that is needed to provide safe, quality, and clean housing. And so, we have to all work together to ensure that those reasonable rate of return is available, so that there is housing available to folks. So we could do more things like create more housing ADUs, help people to transition from being renters to buying their own homes, and provide vouchers if they can't afford to pay, and tax credits to ensure that we can build more affordable housing. And I'm looking at a clock, and I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
I think you're on mute.
I'm on mute.
Max is on mute. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
You're still muted, Max.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So I think that, oh, no, yes, we have Jamaal who will be answering the question. What are the top 3 barriers to housing production? And what are the policies that you would support to address those barriers?
Yeah. So I think, the others hit the nail on the head. I think one of the main issues is availability of housing. And with that, I think that we have depended far too much on developers to bail us out of this issue. And I think that clearly that hasn't been, that has not resolved the issue. With the building of housing, we see high rises, luxury apartments being built. There's a apartment housing that was built on Jefferson and La Cienega. 1 bedroom is going for over $5,000 a month, which is more than my mortgage, which is insane. And that's not affordable to folks who are making $15 an hour. So the availability of housing is definitely one of the barriers. How do we address that? It comes with public housing. I think the state should invest more in public housing and put union workers to build these public housing that makes it more affordable. But not just public housing, mixed use housing, grocery stores at the bottom that are public grocery stores, cooperatives that are not for profit, that employ the folks who live in those buildings or live in the community, that pay a living wage so that they can afford the housing. The other thing is, Lola mentioned, and I agree with, is fairness. We need to make sure that folks aren't being discriminated against because they have a Section 8 voucher or any type of other voucher that provides subsidized housing. We know that a lot of times, landlords will turn away from Section 8 housing because they're afraid, oh, well, this person I may not be able to get rid of this person if I need to. So we need to legislate away from housing discrimination in that respect. And we also see housing discrimination against seniors, low-income folks, folks with families, because there comes a families become stigmatized when they come with lots of folks. And then lastly, as we mentioned earlier, is affordability and increasing wages so that they're able to match housing affordability. That is what's putting folks on the streets. And we definitely need to address our wages with businesses, unions, and the state.
Thank you, Jamaal. All right, so we're going to move on to our next question, and we're going to start with Cheryl this time. Cheryl, California has more homeless people than any other state. Many residents are fed up with having to deal with people living on the streets and are pushing for sweeps. What are your plans to resolve this crisis?
This is definitely a crisis. And as someone that is deeply involved in housing, it really saddens me to see, the number that are out there, and it seems to be a growing problem. But I don't believe that it's completely linked to affordability, although affordability is definitely an issue. The rent can be high, especially those that were forced to face rent control. And then once rent control was lifted, they just raised the rents to market rent, which made it unaffordable for many people. But there's also another component to homelessness, and that has to do with mental health, drug addiction, possible domestic violence issues where family members are fleeing from a home due to domestic violence, as well as you have foster children that are becoming of age and now they're out on the streets. And so with regard to those that are involved or that have mental health issues and drug addiction issues, we need to think about maybe taking a tougher stance. I know that, we've gone through the court system and Judge Carter was out there, and it's very interesting to see a judge who's being an activist. And we do have to honor the rights of those people to be free and to live. But there also has to be a balance between their freedom and the freedom of others, who are walking down the street and who live in neighborhoods and go to school in those areas. And so we have to work very fast to provide housing to them. And once it's offered, if they don't accept, then we'll have to take a stronger stance, which may involve possibly forcing them to receive some kind of help.
Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, Jamaal. So yes. So what are your plans to deal with homelessness?
Thank you. Yes. So homelessness is a great issue in our district, in our state. I actually drove back to Portland over the holidays, and I drove through the I-5 corridor, stopped in Reading, and there was a homelessness issue in Reading. I think what we need to do is have a holistic approach. So there is a mental health crisis that causes a lot of folks who are on the streets. I have an aunt who suffers from bipolar schizophrenia, who every so often ends up on the streets to no fault of her own. But what happened was the Reagan administration had demolished access to mental health facilities, which is leaving those folks on the streets. I'm a firm believer in that we wouldn't let children who can't take care of themselves to be on the streets. So we shouldn't let mentally ill folks be on the streets as well, because they can't physically, mentally take care of themselves. So I think that we need to rebuild our mental health facilities that offer humane housing opportunities and opportunities to get folks back fully medicated and back into their homes, but off the streets. I think we also need to look at LGBTQ youth. We know that a lot of folks who identify and look like me are put on the streets because of who they love. And so we need to look at opportunities to have housing for LGBTQ youth. And lastly, I don't believe in sweeps. I think that it's inhumane, and I think folks end up being pushed to other neighborhoods, and that's just pushing or kicking the can down the road. It doesn't support a long-term solution. And so what a long-term solution, again, is permanent housing solutions, not temporary. We know that folks who are in temporary shelters often leave, or they're not sustainable, or there aren't enough beds. And so what we need to do is partner with our city council, our city supervisor, and the legislator, and build more housing solutions that offer treatment programs, that offer back on track programs similar to the one that Vice President Kamala Harris put together, an opportunity for folks to get back on their feet, and offer housing at a, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but offers housing solution at no conditions.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lola.
Really great question, and I appreciate the answers. The unhoused population is not a monolith. I fought with workers, unemployed construction workers who were sleeping on the street when they lost their cars because they couldn't get jobs building public facilities right in their own communities, though they were certified. We've helped, families who've experienced wage theft and didn't get paid, and that was the money they needed, to make that rent before eviction, and lost their housing. And certainly we know there, I think Cheryl mentioned the free market. We know what the free market has done in terms of mental health services, safety net programs, protections against civil rights, and other very necessary and important safety nets and protections for communities, particularly Black and Brown communities that represent the majority of the unhoused in our county. So we need an intersectional approach. We need a multi-pronged approach. We need to make sure, in my role on the ad hoc committee on Black people experiencing homelessness, we learned the intersections between housing discrimination and employment discrimination. We learned that the restructuring of the economy was partly responsible from those industrial workers who had worked in South Central LA, losing their homes in the Great Recession and the housing crisis under previous administrations, and now living on the street. So we need to, one, focus on how do we create quality jobs that allow families to get out of the precarious instability and housing insecurity. We need to invest in wraparound comprehensive services for our communities.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next question. Jamaal, the pandemic has revealed the limitations of our healthcare system. What is your plan to make healthcare more readily and equitably available? Do you support a single payer system in California?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, that's another reason why, or what motivated me to run. I was, disappointed that AB 1400 didn't pass. There's been some debate that some of it was motivated because of Democratic donors, Democratic donors prevented some of the folks in the assembly from voting on it. And then there's also some debate that says that there was lack of courage or the numbers didn't add up. I'm a firm believer that this is probably a mix of both of those issues, folks not having courage and the numbers not adding up. But I am a believer in single payer healthcare, although I think that we've learned that we can't be all or nothing, and I'm willing to compromise on that. And so one plan that is notable that I think would be workable and would pass a California legislator would be a plan similar to the one that Secretary Buttigieg proposed in his presidential campaign, which is kind of a Medicare for all who want it. So an opportunity for folks who like their healthcare. We know that unions fought for healthcare. They fought for their rights they want with their healthcare and may want to keep their healthcare. But then there's also the opportunity for folks to opt into a public option. And so I think that would be beneficial and maybe more appeasing to some of the folks in the legislature that may not have confidence in a bill like AB 1400. Lastly, I'll add is the way to pass that is, again, getting support through the community, working with unions, working with small businesses, and educating the voter to understand that healthcare costs would decrease. If we're not able to get something passed like that, I think we need to work towards lowering prescription drugs, again, at the state level, because we can't depend on the Republican obstructionists in the Congress and the two Democrats that we have in the Senate. So we need to work something on the California state level that lowers prescription drugs and also offers an opt-in option for public healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamaal. Lola, please tell us what your plan is to make healthcare more readily and equitably available, and do you support a single payer system in California?
I do, and I was devastated to see that AB 1400 was not taken up, but I understand why. I think Assembly Member Clara made the right decision to hold the bill, and as a legislature, when I get to Sacramento, I will make sure that we reintroduce and move forward with passing universal health care. There are a lot of reasons why it didn't pass, but we know that the healthcare lobby is all powerful and has a lot of control. And we need to push back on corporate greed that is creating a health crisis in our communities, particularly, seeing this in COVID and in the disparate and disproportionate ways that Black and immigrant workers, many who don't have fair access to health care, were disproportionately impacted. And so, I believe the system is broken, but we need to broaden and unify Californians around this issue. There's a lot of misinformation about coverage and who will be impacted. And I think we need to work together to make sure the message that healthcare, universal healthcare, brings down costs. It helps our state to thrive from a health perspective and also from a financial health perspective. And so I am in support of universal healthcare. I stand with healthcare workers who too often, because of corporate privatization and consolidation, are working with exploding numbers of patient to nurse ratios. Firefighters who can't get healthcare from injuries because medical insurers are denying them. So we need universal health care for a number of reasons in this state. And I will fight for it.
Cheryl, please tell us what you'll do to make healthcare more readily and equitably available, and do you support a single payer system in California?
Yes, I do. And as I mentioned, I served as a commissioner working on healthcare issues for the last 5 years as a volunteer in Sacramento. I traveled back and forth there, working with nurses and psychiatric technicians, trying to improve our healthcare system. And so we definitely voted as a board, a commission, to support AB 1400, and I definitely supported it. I believe that there were some issues, though, with the type of funding that was suggested or was proposed to support it. It tended to focus on property taxes, and that is only a limited part of our population. And so there was some pushback. But if we can think about how everyone who can afford to pay or contribute towards creating this system of Medicare for all, I think that that's something that will go through. It'll be, more successful the next time around. And I plan to go up there to Sacramento and propose that. And I think that that would be a fantastic thing. But let's take a look at some other ways too that we can provide healthcare for everyone. I believe that I had talked before about how we can use the capitation system. Instead of turning over our premiums to a middle person, we can use that to create funding to community clinics and healthcare providers so that they can receive a monthly income, essentially. And if you sign up with a particular physician that you like, you can go to that physician as many times as you need, and your services are covered. You don't have to worry about payment. And if you do have a catastrophic injury, then there can be a carve out. But also, I want to recognize those people that love their health insurance from wherever it's coming from, whether it's an employer or a union or wherever it is, who want to keep their insurance.
Thank you, Cheryl.
So let's create an opt out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful questions around healthcare. Let's move on to the next question, and we'll start with Lola this time. Lola, what do you see as the problems with criminal justice and public safety in California? And how do you think these can be best addressed through state government budget and policy?
So on the criminal justice front, I believe we need to redefine what public safety is. When workers do well, right, in our communities do well. And in my work with the LA Black Worker Center, one of the things that we have come to understand is that, we don't have an issue around recidivism. We don't have an issue around we don't have issues around, over criminalization of our communities when communities have resources and good jobs and are sustained. And so this idea of, a public safety program that has come, over the last few cycles that sort of had this broken windows theory that, where there's poverty, that's where we need to over surveil. Wrongly, incarcerating hundreds of thousands of Black and Brown community members, extracting resources from our communities by overfunding police departments while our safety nets are suffering. We're spending more money on prisons than we are on job creation and on upskilling and job training. So to me, the issue when we talk about this issue of criminal justice, it's again another intersectional issue. How do we
15
deal
seconds.
with racism? How do we deal with the compounded poverty? And how do we hold police and the system accountable to Black and Brown lives, particularly those who are outlaw and lawless police officers?
Thank you, Lola. Cheryl, so what do you see as the problems with criminal justice and public safety in California, and how do you think these can be best addressed through state government budget and policy?
All right. So again, this is something that I've had direct experience with as an attorney that's been practicing in criminal law for part of my career. And all those things are so important because I don't have to imagine many of those things and try to create laws. I can see it firsthand how it impacts everyone that's involved in that in the community. So we need to look at the sentencing guidelines. They simply haven't been fair. We need to make justice fair and equitable. We need to look at alternatives to incarcerations to keep, hopefully, families intact. If there are a way to, provide things like probation, monitoring, mental health, addiction treatment, things like that, to keep them out of prison. And if they do go, of course, job training and education, so when they come out, they can obtain a job and not have to be, hopefully, be the subject of recidivism and have to return. And we need to do something better with our police. That doesn't mean to take away the budget, because we need our police to, help us with our community, but we need them to act more as guardians, not warriors within our community. And so I think community policing is great because they get an opportunity to meet people who live within the neighborhoods and get to know them as individuals, so that if there's a problem, they can talk to people and help to de-escalate instead of escalating the situation. We need a civilian oversight group that can participate with the police officers in evaluating where there's examples of excessive force being used repeatedly by an officer, so that we can determine if that is a bad apple that maybe needs to find another job. Okay, that maybe needs to find another job instead of policing. We need bias training. So there's, work with our police officers and keep people out of prison. That's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Jamaal, what do you see as the problems with criminal justice and public safety in California, and how do you think these can be best addressed through state government budget and policy?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I think that we need to address the root causes of crime, and that starts with funding our schools and making sure that our schools are adequately funded, particularly as we looked at Black and Brown communities in South LA. We know that there are disparities between the resources that are allocated to the folks who live in my neighborhood to the folks that live in even Culver City or Mid-City or Westwood. There's definitely disparities in access to resources the students have here than they do there. So I think that starts with reinvesting more funding to students out in areas that are historically been marginalized or oppressed. It also, as Lola mentioned, it's correlated directly with access to jobs and making sure that folks are able to meet their resource needs. So that obviously means housing, food, shelter. That also means another thing to do is to remove barriers to folks who have been formerly incarcerated. And I think a lot of times we neglect to realize folks who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated can't get certain grants to get an education. So that puts a barrier to what folks can earn potentially. They've served their time, but now you can't get a grant to go to school. You have to take out student loans. How does that impact one's ability to meet their needs? And then as Cheryl mentioned, police oversight. I think that whenever there's misconduct within our police, we need to look at making sure that there's a special counsel that is removed from the police unions, that is removed from any kind of in-house association that maybe comes from a different state or a different area of the state, so that they can investigate those misconduct. And again, I agree with Cheryl, what she said as well as community policing. You need to know who the folks are in your neighborhoods in order to police them. You need to live there, because once you live here, you start to care.
2 seconds.
When you see the folks who are in your neighborhood, when you have to access and you run into the folks in the grocery stores, at the libraries, or at the school when you're dropping off your kids, those relationships are built and you know the people who are in there and you're able to better serve that community. So I think we should definitely push for community policing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamaal. Wonderful. So we'll be moving to the next question. and that is on the environment. The planet is on the verge of climate collapse. Californians are already dying and losing homes in climate-related disasters. We seem to lack the political will to act as aggressively as possible to mitigate the crisis. California no longer leads the nation in its environmental policies. What are the most important policies you would pursue, Cheryl?
Yeah, well, there's so many, and I'm a big fan of protecting the environment, having grown up as a scout and been out in the wilderness, and also being a lifeguard. I love the ocean and the beach, so we need to protect it from new oil drilling. We need to stop that. There was a recent bill about fracking and keeping oil drilling, moving it farther away from homes, housing, schools, hospitals. So we need to continue with that. We need to focus on, our green policy, and by doing so, it's great because we can create a new infrastructure where we also at the same time not only protect our environment, but we work on providing jobs, great paying jobs for people. Solar, we need to continue with the benefits and different helps with grants and other opportunities to use that so we can create a grid. EV charging, I had an opportunity to travel to Sacramento and work on providing EV charging through a multi-family rental housing so that tenants will have an opportunity to use that. And so that's one of the things that I enjoyed working on in Sacramento. And we need to protect our wetlands, make sure there's no contamination. We need to reduce emissions and continue to have stricter and stricter emissions standards. And we need to provide grants and funding so that we can find alternatives to the use of fossil fuels, like biofuels, and other things that, won't hurt the environment.
15 seconds.
Yeah. So this is the only planet we have. This is our home. We need to do everything we can to protect it.
Thank you, Cheryl. Jamaal, what are the most important policies you would pursue regarding the environment?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with what Cheryl said about the drilling. Unfortunately, with the drilling companies, they can apply for permits to extend their drilling capabilities. They can go for 20 years. So I think if when I go to Sacramento, I would, propose legislation that would stop those permits, because we know that drilling needs to stop now and it can't wait 20 years. We know that the legislation that was passed was for any new drilling, but we need to stop the current drilling that's happening. I think what we also need to look at, and what isn't often talked about, is phasing out natural gas for our heating and for our stoves. There was an article in the New York Times that talked about how much CO2 emissions are put out from cooking. And so I think that I would like to propose legislation that phase out any kind of new builds, putting in gas stoves and moving them to electric. And then also offering incentives for current homeowners or renters that have gas stoves to phase that out and put in electric stoves as well. I think we also need to work towards education on electric vehicles, and with the infrastructure bill that was passed in Congress, educate folks on how to switch to electric vehicles, because I know that there's a lot of hesitancy as it relates to electric vehicles, but educating the public on making that switch, and also providing grants, because we know electric vehicles can be expensive. So offering grants and incentives for folks who want to switch over, whether that be tax rebates or reductions in registration fees. And then I think the other thing, as I agree with Cheryl as well, is in creating incentives and rebates towards solar panels, so that we can switch towards that. And then lastly, I would add is that creating incentives for folks who reduce the use of natural gas. So if we see a reduction in natural gas, whether for whatever reason, then have an opportunity to provide rebates for folks to get some kind of money back so they can put that into the economy.
Thank you, Jamaal. Lola, please share your thoughts on environmental policies you would pursue.
Sure, and I know that COVID sort of pushed the environmental progress a little bit further back in terms of our agenda. So when I get to Sacramento, I want to make sure that we bring it to the forefront, mainly because I live in Windsor Hills and I then my backyard is the Inglewood oil fields, and I stand with Culver City residents in pushing for the shutdown of that oil field, both there and in the Playa del Rey oil field. Natural gas, I mean, look at Ukraine, look at Russia. This is all about oil lines. Natural gas and oil it's just a tremendous threat to our health and our safety on a number of levels. And so I stand with the environmental community in that shutdown, but I do believe in a just transition. When I think about how our society, our city, our cities, our states thrived, a few generations ago, it was the beginning of new industry and opportunity. And the green industry, the green sector really provides the opportunities for jobs of the future. So, where we are shutting down these jobs in this unhealthy, dangerous sector, we have the opportunity to double down and invest in leading the world in green energy and sustainable energy. I'm excited about programs like the High Road Training Partnership Initiative, which is using cap and trade funds to actually invest in green sector and jobs that are helping to build our environment and also create racial and economic equity in our communities. I also really believe that we want to make sure that as we're investing in green technology, things like solar panels, that we're putting them in reach of low income and middle income homeowners, but we're not passing off the cost to renters and low income communities. So how do we work together on this important issue? Thank you.
Thank you all for your thoughts on the environment. We're moving to our last question, which will be directed towards all of you before we move on to candidate-specific questions. So this question is, if elected, this will be the first time any of you hold an elected office, and state senator is a pretty big role. Our last 3 state senators served in the assembly first, and 2 of them had held elected offices before that. So what are the challenges of politics at this high level, and how do you plan to deal with them? Jamaal.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm glad that it came up. What are the challenges? I think some of the challenges so far that I've experienced is kind of breaking through barriers. We had a recent opportunity to apply for the Democratic Party endorsement, and I reached out to 104 of those people on that list, and only 5 of them responded. And so one of the things that I told myself is that when I become elected to this role, if anyone reaches out to me, whether I'm there, whether they're my constituent or not, I'm going to be available to them, because I remember where I came from. When I first started working with seniors, I was washing dishes, I was changing diapers, I was cleaning up blood. And that's the level, or that's the heart that I hold with me to this day, regardless of how successful I've been in my career. And that's the level of heart that I'll hold with me when I'm elected to the seat. The other barriers I see is creating relationships, but I've always been great with creating relationships. I see 2 friends on here that I hope to meet in person someday, with Lola and Cheryl and everyone else in the Culver City Democratic Club. But I don't think that it's the end. I think that what we need for this role and for this position is a new voice. I have to be frank, I think the favorite for this race has been hand selected. I think the current incumbent was hand selected by the incumbent before her. And so we need a new vision. We need the opportunity to provide choices for voters. We need an opportunity for new voices. And that's what I'm coming with, a new voice, a new opportunity. And lastly, I'll add is that I think sometimes folks are a little fed up with career politicians. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in today. I've been told so many times, well, why don't you run for city council? Or why don't you run for neighborhood council? Why do I need to run for neighborhood council? Why do we need career politicians making decisions? That's part of the reason why folks are frustrated with politics, because they're tired of the career politicians making the same promises, being unavailable, not responding to emails, not responding to text messages, and only appearing every 4 years. And that's not the candidate I'm going to be. I'm going to be the candidate that responds, is available, and will be the candidate of the people.
Thank you, Jamaal. Cheryl, what are the challenges entering politics at this high level, and how do you plan to deal with them?
Well, Jamaal mentioned, the issue with some of the, going through the Democratic clubs can sometimes be challenging, but at least no matter what, you get a chance to meet some great people. But besides that, traveling back and forth to Sacramento, Well, as a state commissioner, I've already demonstrated that I can do that and do that consistently, to be there on time, to be prepared, to be able to make my points. And also, since I've had an opportunity to actually advocate on many of the laws that are being proposed with the state senators and the assembly members, I've had an opportunity travel there, sit in each of their offices, discuss their proposed bills in detail, give suggestions as to how they might improve it or how it might impact my community or my trade organizations. And so I'm very familiar with them, their offices, and then what it takes to serve in that capacity. I have also opened my own office and hired people, and so I'm would be ready on day one to open my office as a state senator, and hire the staff necessary to do the job. And as an attorney, I've represented clients so many issues under the law, and I think it's very, very similar to meeting with my constituents, hearing their concerns, helping them to resolve their issues, and fighting for them. It's not always about what I want, although I have to maintain my values. I know that, but it's about representing
Second.
them. And that's what I intend to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Lola, please tell us how you will deal with the challenges of politics at a high level, and how do you plan to deal with them?
So I have been endorsed by Senator Sidney Kamlager. I have been endorsed by Supervisor Holly Mitchell. I've been endorsed by City Councilman Marquise Harris, Assemblyman Isaac Bryan. And, I think leadership and elections matter. I am coming to, as you say, politics for the first time. But I also believe that in this moment, coming out of COVID, where we have a surplus in the state, where we have these crises that are converging on the lives and the humanity of Black people and immigrant people and working class people, we absolutely have to do something different. And I'm proud to have those endorsements, because I think we have to go to Sacramento with a district agenda, and we need to be aligned, and there needs to be a level of coordination and strategy and vision that we can really move the needle on the issues that we're talking about. One state Senate district can't do it alone. And I have worked at the intersections of racism and mean capitalism and greed, and seen what it's done to our communities, how destabilizing it has been. And we need to bring someone that has been on the front lines, that have had these tough conversations, that have had to negotiate, that has had to advocate and fight for people, and bring a bottom-up agenda to Sacramento. Because this is where the strategies are, where the folks who are most impacted, where some of the most creative and thoughtful approaches, they're happening on the ground. Places like, Culver City around rent control is an example, right? What you all are doing, we need to figure out, how do we bring that to Sacramento? How do we do the work that the people need us to do now? And we begin to pull ourselves out of this deep and so difficult crisis for so many.
Thank you, Lola. Wonderful. So now we've got candidate-specific questions that we'll be running through. The first one will be for Cheryl. Cheryl, you are the president of AGLA, the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. In 2020, you told our club you were inspired by your advocacy work with AGLA to get more engaged in state politics. The positions promoted by AGLA's PAC are in almost every case opposed to those in the platform of the California Democratic Party and of the resolutions and endorsements of the club, including rent control, tenant right to counsel, inclusionary zoning, Ellis Act reform, urban infill development, seismic retrofitting, and just cause eviction. Why would a club with a progressive majority endorse you?
All right. Because I am in a unique position to provide balance, because I started off as being a tenant. I was a tenant, and so I know what it's like to be there, and I believe that I can help and balance both sides and bring both sides together. You know, we have statewide rent control, and a lot of people don't realize that because we immediately face COVID. It's called AB 1482, and we work with the governor's office to reach that agreement. And so now there is rent control. People don't have to worry about it, and they shouldn't have to argue about it. It's there already. Also, I was one of the ones that first mentioned rental assistance programs when COVID-19 first kicked in, and people were saying, well, maybe we should stop paying rent. We should quit or forgive rent. Rental assistance program and mortgage assistance is there, and my organization fought for that. We're also doing other things like helping renters to think about and help them to provide and buy their own units. We have to give notice to them and the opportunity to buy, and so that's a great opportunity for them. We've done other things, like I said, the EV chargers to help tenants be able to get EV vehicles, ADUs, so that people can build housing in their backyards if they choose to, and receive a little bit of extra rental income. And also, we fought for renters' privacy protection on the rental registry. I mean, rental registry sounds good, but you know that means that whatever you pay for rent in your name will become public. And I think many people do not want that. Ellis is there. It's already there. It provides relocation benefits and notice. And I personally couldn't pay some of the relocation benefits to anyone. $25,000
Thank you,
to
Cheryl.
offer them to move. All right.
Lola, in this last legislative session, progressive bills, including single payer and Ellis Act reform, failed to come to a vote. As a first-time candidate who hasn't worked in party politics, what are your strategies for advancing your platform?
You know, on these issues, what I've learned and how you can solve problems is that you need dynamic coalitions. You need to bring folks to the table, both, you know, labor, healthcare, providers, workers, community. We need to come together in these different coalitions to be able to think through what are the ways that we can negotiate policies that helped us to move toward progress. It was devastating to see that these bills did not move forward, but we needed stronger coalitions. We need to use our time in the fall to work through these conditions, these issues, to negotiate, to problem solve them, to work them, to have the conversations that need to be had. So when we move these important bills, that we are not letting our constituents, our residents, our neighbors down by letting these important policies die on the Capitol floor. So my strategy, I've worked with unions, I've worked with employers, I've worked with community leaders, I've worked with systems navigators, I've worked with the nonprofit sector, I've worked with students, I've worked with scholars, I've worked with a dynamic group of leaders. When we come together and we have a facilitated conversation and process that helps us understand that we're working toward a vision. And it's not always that particular bill. It's a vision for our state, for our communities. And I think I can build support and community around vision and do the negotiations and provide and facilitate the negotiations necessary to move the work forward.
Thank you, Lola. Jamaal, your political resume features work for the Clinton, Harris, and Biden presidential campaigns. This club largely supported Sanders and Warren in the primaries. See in the Democratic Party, platform-wise.
Thank you. You know, that's a great question, and I had it from one of the Democratic delegates that I had to speak with. You know, I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all for any of the candidates. I like to describe myself as a Hillary, Obama, Kamala, Elizabeth Warren, AOC Democrat. And each of those candidates have a unique thing that they bring to the table. AOC has a way of explaining things to constituents and reaching out to folks. President Obama has a way of building a coalition of folks that has never been seen before. Elizabeth Warren has a way of connecting with people and explaining bills so that anyone can understand it. And Kamala Harris was the first in every job that she's had, similar to me. And so, again, as I would say that there's no one size fits all that I would put myself into in that category. But I definitely see myself I'm a lifelong Democrat. I've always voted Democrat. I voted for Elizabeth Warren in the primary. I voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And it was based on the relationships that she had built with the Black community, with the LGBTQ community. And again, there's no one size fits all, but there are Democrats, and we're a big tent ticket party that has unique ideas to the table. And some would say that some are more progressive than others, but I think we all stand for the same thing, particularly the three of us on this screen. We all stand for the same thing. We have the same goals. We just have different unique ideas of how to get there. And I would say that that's the same thing with the candidates that I mentioned before and the ones that I've worked for in a volunteer capacity in the past.
Thank you, Jamaal. Cheryl, while many states copied California's Proposition 18, which bases property taxes on the purchase price rather than the current value, only California's version covered commercial property, locking in a giant break for the biggest corporations and crushing public schools and other services for decades. In 2020, this club endorsed Prop 15, Schools and Communities First, which would have taxed commercial property worth more than $5 million at its actual value. And almost 2/3 of voted for it, although it did lose statewide. A similar proposition is likely to be on the November ballot. According to your questionnaire, you oppose this reform, as do AGLA and the California Chamber of Commerce. Please explain to us your position.
Okay, I'm not sure that I said no, but I believe I said that California is one of the highest taxing states that there are in our country. I mean, there are others, just a few others. And I believe that I said that we need to take a look at first at what we're doing with our current taxes. We need to provide transparency on that, see where that money is going, and make sure that it's being properly allocated throughout the state of California, as well as to support education. And believe me, I believe that we need to do more to support education, and we need to supplement those school districts that are in a lower property value state and they don't have sufficient income. We need to supplement that to provide quality education for everyone throughout the state of California. So if we need taxation, okay, let's look at the commercial properties. I'm just concerned that the next step is going to be the homeowners who can ill afford to even pay their current mortgage, insurance, as well as other maintenance expenses. And now the possibility of the next step being higher property taxes. I think about my dad and mom on, a fixed income. And, now that they are in retirement age, and how are they going to maintain that property tax? Well, I guess I'm going to have to figure out how to work a lot harder to help them, to supplement them so that they can pay their taxes. But if we need that, we can take a look at that. But remember, we have a surplus budget in the state of California already. So let's look at taking that money and allocating it where we need it on education.
Thank you, Cheryl. Lola, union membership is at record lows. Workers' right to organize is under attack. Construction unions are fighting the Green New Deal, and police and prison guard groups are claiming to speak as quote unquote labor. As project director of the UCLA Labor Center and founder of the LA Black Workers Center, how do you see the future role of unions and the working class in the Democratic Party and in progressive politics?
Workers have always been the backbone of the Democratic Party, as have unions, and particularly public sector unions, which I'm proud to say represents the largest group of organized Black workers in the country, and drive a lot of the progressive pro-worker, pro-community initiatives that help to build our community. So We have to fight for worker voice. We have to ensure the state of California is supporting the rights of workers to organize. We have to lift up those companies that give workers control and voice over their wages and working conditions. And we need to limit investments in companies that are adding to poverty and homelessness and the taxpayers' bill because they don't pay fair wages. 60% of new jobs created in this county were low wage jobs. In a county where a studio apartment, right in my neighborhood here, close by Lamert Park, studio apartment is about $1,200. So, if you're in a job that's paying under $15 an hour, you will not be able to afford your housing. So we have to see organizing is critically important. And we also have to push our unions to lead in the values of trade unionism, is that all workers have dignity, including the Black young men who are union members, and the children of union members should be able to walk their communities and not face death at the hands of the state. And we have to have a building and construction trades union that understands, yes, we always need good jobs and we cannot afford to lose one. But at the same time, we have to build our communities. And I think there are unions that understand and are beginning to understand just transition in a number of different ways. I think we have to create the space and opportunity to support workers and helping to figure out where they fit in the new California that we need.
Thank you. Jamaal, on your website, you say you want to introduce legislation that offers a quote unquote kicker refund. Please define this and explain why the state should return a surplus rather than investing it in social programs and vulnerable communities or creating a rainy day fund.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the kicker fund obviously should be, well, let me explain what the kicker fund is. It's similar to what happens in Oregon. So anytime that there's a budget surplus in Oregon, the citizens or those who pay taxes are offered a kicker refund. So they kick back a portion of the surplus back to the residents. And the reason why this is done is written in the Oregon Constitution, but it also is proven beneficial to folks who need additional help with paying for childcare, for paying for formula, for paying for diapers, for paying for rent, for going back into the economy, for buying a new car, putting a down payment on a new car, buying food, paying off a credit card bill. It's used to supplement the income of folks who pay taxes. And basically what the state is saying, hey, you've done your part, we're doing well, you deserve a little bit back. And so I think that would be beneficial to the citizens of California. I think it goes into hand with what Cheryl was saying earlier. We are seen as an overtaxed state. And so if we're given an opportunity to kick some things back to the citizens of California, or excuse me, I hate to use the word citizens, I should say taxpayers, because we know that even the non-citizens pay taxes and they don't always get the benefits of citizens get. But if we're able to kick some of the portion of the surplus back to taxpayers, I think that would be definitely beneficial, not only for our economy, but for the families. Again, the childcare tax credit expired again because of the 2 Democrats in the Senate who don't have the courage to pass it. And so some of the kicker refund could go towards helping someone pay for childcare, or again, paying for formula, paying for diapers. Families need the support. And we know that, in areas where there's food deserts, they need to be able to buy, healthy food options. And that's an opportunity to help. And as we again look at the pandemic, we know that there was somewhat of a decrease in purchasing power, but that would also help in increasing the purchasing power. So that's why I think that we should invest in and looking in towards a kicker tax refund for the state of California.
Thank you, Jamaal. Well, that wraps up all our questions for this evening. I wanted to give a big thank you to Cheryl, Jamaal, and Lola for sharing their thoughts tonight. I think you all are very impressive candidates, and we are definitely honored that you took the time to answer our questions. I'm going to pass it back over to Jeff to close off the evening.
Oh, sure. So thanks, Max. We had actually promised closing statements. So if you'd each like 2 minutes to do that. And
of course, how could I deprive these wonderful candidates of their closing statements?
I'm honored to get to hold them for a minute.
That's wonderful. Okay, so let's start with Lola.
Thank you so much, and for Maximina for your facilitation. It was really a wonderful conversation. So I just want to close by saying, you know, I have a panther and a centaur at my home, and often driving through your beautiful city, the canopy of trees, and in so many ways, Culver City, you know, is that idyllic, you know, California dream place, right? And you know, for far too long, as I mentioned, you know, so much of the California dreaming is just out of reach for our communities. I think you all have worked in Culver City to build just tremendous bridges across lines of extreme wealth and privilege and disparities, and have tried to tackle these complex issues. And we need more places like Culver City. We need more residents like you and your voices and your positions on these issues to be lifted up and brought to Sacramento to help move the important policies that we need. And I want to be that person that helps to facilitate that and to move that, because I believe your voices are also very critically important in this process. I want to think about, you know, the ways in which Culver City has your recreational programs and open schools and investment in open space, investment in environmental housing and other important issues. And I believe that really is about equity. I think it's something that we need to see in other parts of our district, where we can make sure that families have that toolkit to build the kind of California that they need, whether it be good schools, whether it be quality jobs, whether it be, you know, access to healthcare. You know, I want to work alongside of Supervisor Holly Mitchell, Assemblyman Bryan, and others to make this happen, because I believe that, you know, we do have that opportunity now to move new alliances and bottom up change.
Thank you, Lola. Jamaal, would you like to share your closing thoughts with the club?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Culver City Democrats, for the opportunity. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Lola. It's great to meet both of you. I want to start out by saying that, you know, there's no doubt that Cheryl or Lola or myself would be great candidates for this role. They both represent powerful Black women that I admire beyond words, and they've done great work in the community. But we're also here to make a decision about who should represent not only Culver City, but the greater district at large. And I'm the only candidate that represents history. As I mentioned earlier, that should I be elected, I would be the first openly gay Black LGBTQ candidate in state legislative history. And we know that Democrats are all about making history. We broke the glass ceiling in 2016 when we selected Hillary Clinton to be our candidate to represent us in the Democratic Party. We broke the glass ceiling with Kamala Harris being the first DA in San Francisco, with being the first Attorney General, with being the first Black woman to represent the state in the US Senate, and of course, being the first vice president, female vice president, the first Black vice president, and the first Black Asian vice president. And so I'm asking you here to help me make history, as I mentioned before. I was the first man in my family to graduate from college, the first man, or the only man, to have a graduate degree. And as I mentioned before, I would be the first LGBTQ candidate in California state legislative history. I'm here to dedicate myself to the Culver City Democratic Club by being humble, remembering where I came from, being available, and not thinking that, you know, when I become a politician, I'll only come around every 4 years for an endorsement. I pledge to be a part of the group, to be engaged in the community, to be in community events like I've done in the past throughout the district. And again, I bring a unique perspective. I grew up in Oregon, so I know what the services that are provided in other districts and what should be provided in our district. And I'm willing to bring that here, should I be so fortunate enough to be selected to move on to Sacramento to represent the great folks. So I appreciate the opportunity, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Jamaal. Cheryl.
Yes, okay.
What's up for the evening?
All right. So thank you to the Culver City Democratic Club, to our moderator, and to the other candidates for participating in this candidates forum. I would like to just say that once elected, I will provide transparency. I'll keep an open door policy. I'll always meet regularly with the members of this community, and I promise to keep you informed. I believe that my legal background, although not necessarily a requirement, but I believe that it will help It will enable me to help propose, evaluate, and advocate for laws that will benefit this district and the people of the state of California. My history of public service already shows to you that I am dedicated to this community, and I will always stay on that path and not be swayed by special interests whose interest conflicts with this community. I will work to create jobs, keep taxes to a minimum when we can. I will help to improve the economy, and I will help to promote clean energy, public jobs, public infrastructure, and I'll work to always increase affordable housing and support small businesses as well. I will address the after effects of COVID-19 pandemic on our education, health, and welfare, and I will work tirelessly to improve our district, and I will never give up until we all accomplish what is best for our community. So again, thank you. My name is Cheryl Turner, and I'm running to be your next state senator. I hope to have your endorsement.
Thank you once again to the candidates, and also thank you to all of the club members who took the time to attend this forum today. Jeff, this time we're really close to it up.